Hi, I'm Brandon Tam, Associate Curator of the Orchid Collection here at the Huntington. What we're going to be talking today is Phalaenopsis, the orchid Phalaenopsis here. These are the most common orchids, so that's why we're going to choose this as the foundation of what we're going to use to illustrate how to repot your orchids. And you can see that it is quite pot bound. So if you look at this pot here, you can see that the roots are actually bulging out of the pot here. So first things first, you want to get a pair of clippers. And here at the Huntington, we sterilize our tools because we want to make sure that we don't spread diseases or viruses from one plant to the next. So sterilization is very, very important when it comes to your tools. So what I like to use here is a propane tank here with a burner. All I need to do is turn it on, and for about 7 seconds on each side, that's how long you want to sterilize your tools for. So this is a great way for really sterilizing your clippers for any tools that you may be using. So from here, I want to carefully cut the plastic pot off of this. And I can only do this with this type of plastic pot because it's so lightweight, it's pretty thin. I can cut it off really easily. The next aspect is you want to take out all this moss. So when they ship this over from Taiwan, they typically pot this up in sphagnum moss because oftentimes these orchids are sitting on containers being shipped across on large boats. But what happens is when it arrives to the United States, when it sits on our shelves and we actually purchase it and bring it into our homes, the moss actually retains a little too much water. So you can see here, what I'm doing is carefully removing the old sphagnum moss. And you can hear a little bit of crunching here, but it's okay. If you break some roots along the way, it's not a big deal. You can see this is really pot bound, so it takes a little bit of time to remove all of this sphagnum moss. So you want to do your best in removing as much sphagnum moss as possible without damaging too much of the plant. And in the process of taking out the sphagnum moss, you also want to look at the roots that are on this plant. Some roots are happy, some roots are not doing too great. What you want to do is identify the good ones, leave them alone, but identify the bad ones, and then from there you can cut off any of that old roots that may not be alive, may have rotted. And from here you can take a look at the roots. So there's a lot of happy roots here, thankfully. There are not many dead ones here, except for maybe this one here. You can see that. We can see over here is actually a good example. So you can see it's pretty healthy. This strand here is pretty healthy except for the bottom half. You can see this is healthy up to this point here. So if you actually feel the roots, feel it and actually press your fingers and pinch it a little bit. And if it's quite firm, if it's not squishy, it's pretty good. You want to keep those. But at the very bottom here, pinch the bottom here and you can see that it's actually very, very soft. I already sterilized my tools, so I can use the same tools on the same plant. You don't need to sterilize from cut to cut, but make sure you sterilize between plant to plant. So from there, I'm just going to cut right where the good part of the root meets the bad part of the root. Cut it off, and then there you go. You're pretty good on that aspect there. Look at that. It's pretty good. The roots are pretty long. What I'm going to do next is identifying a pot that works for this plant here. So we have a few options here. So these two, for example, you can see that this one has a lot of holes and this one has a good amount of holes, but not as much as this one. So for me, preferably, for most orchids, you want a pot with a good amount of holes on it because it provides good drainage, it provides good aeration. That's something you want to look for. I like to drop the orchid in and see if the feet fits the shoe. In this case, the roots fitting the pot itself. If you look there, I usually like to say if the roots are touching the sides of the pot, that's what is recommended. So keep that in mind, look at that, that's pretty good. What I'm going to do is then backfill the bark into the pot. So I'm going to add this in here, and you want to tap it in every so often. You want to fill the voids because if there's any air pockets within the plant itself, you want to make sure that you fill it in because when you do water, if we have large air pockets, it's going to dry out a little faster. It's not going to be as happy. And on top of that, you want to make sure that you press your plant in pretty firmly so it's not going it's not going anywhere. A lot of these orchids in the wild, it grows as epiphytes, as I mentioned, and they won't establish themselves securely until they feel like they're situated in a home where they won't wiggle, where they won't go from one place to the next. So this is pretty good. This is pretty good. So I put it down into the pot, and what you want to do is you want to have usually about half an inch or an inch, a half an inch, an inch right below the rim of the pot. So do keep that in mind in the process. And then from that, a great way of knowing if you potted firmly enough is by lifting the plant by the leaves, and if the pot doesn't fall out, then that means you have repotted firmly enough. You may have heard that using ice cubes are the best way of watering your orchid, but that's actually not the case. Do keep in mind that a lot of these orchids are growing in tropical areas, warm climates, and when it rains, the water itself is not ice cold, just like this. If you put this on top of your plant, on top of your pot, all that cold water that trickles down in the root zone is going to cause a shock to the plant, and that's something you don't want. It's not going to kill the plant over a long period of time, but it's just not going to be as happy as it could be. But take a look at this. So for example, if you haven't already repotted your orchid, if you just bought this from a local supermarket or a home improvement store, it's potted in sphagnum moss. This sphagnum moss retains a ton of water. It's almost like a sponge. You really want to water about once every month because it retains a lot of water. But if you already repotted your orchid and you already changed the potting medium from a sphagnum moss to potting mix of bark and perlite or any other amendments, the watering style is a little different. So remember, with sphagnum moss, a lot of water retention because it's almost like a sponge. But when it comes with bark, it actually doesn't retain as much water. So there are many different ways of watering your orchid. So the first way is actually watering your orchid under a faucet. I usually have it under the faucet for about 10 to 15 seconds. But if you don't want to do that, you can actually grab a pitcher of water and you can just replicate that. But you want to make sure you get water across the entire pot. What I like to do is water in the front, water in the back, and go for about 10 to 15 seconds. But do keep in mind that when you do water your Phalaenopsis orchid, you don't want to get water in the crown of your Phalaenopsis orchid because the combination of cold and wet can cause the plant to rot. And if there's moisture in the crown of the pot and it gets too cold at night, then it can actually cause the plant itself to rot over a period of time. And then the last way of watering is actually just having your orchid sit in a shallow pan of water, just like this, and let it soak for about 10 minutes over a period of 10 minutes. And from there, it'll rehydrate the plant. As I mentioned before, sphagnum moss retains a lot of water. So for the sphagnum moss, you really want to water maybe once every month. But when it comes to bark, you want to water maybe once every 7 days or so. It really depends on the mix that you're using. But on top of that, you really need to factor in where you're growing your orchids, outside versus inside. So outside, your orchid is exposed to the elements, it's hotter, maybe it's a little drier, especially in here in Southern California. So you may want to water a little bit more often. Versus inside, where it's room temperature, it may not be as hot. You may want to water maybe a little less because it's not exposed to elements like it would be outside. Fertilizer is not going to cure your dying orchid, but do keep in mind that this is the process in which you need to make sure that your orchids are happy and that they can rebloom the following year. There's many different types of fertilizers that you can get at your local store, at your local home improvement store, and it can be a little confusing from time to time. So if we look at this, for example, this is just one type of fertilizer, but there are 3 numbers on the bag. So the first one is nitrogen, the second one is phosphorus, and the last one is potassium, so that's NPK. So these 3 numbers are really important because it helps promote the overall health, good health of the plant in the process. So that's something to keep in mind. The numbers may be a little intimidating at first, but do keep in mind that if you don't understand the numbers, a good fertilizer to get is a well-balanced one, maybe a 20-20-20, well-rounded, where you really can't go wrong. But there's really 2 types of fertilizers that you can use, in which there's the slow release, which is this one here, and then you also have the powdered version in which you mix with water, and then from there you can pour on top of the plant to ensure that that you can actually include it in your watering regimen. But with this, slow release fertilizer is what I want to start out first. And this is great because the slow release fertilizer, every time you water, it actually releases a very small amount of fertilizer. I like to recommend just sprinkling a little bit on the surface of your plant here. And maybe you're doing about half a teaspoon of slow release on top of the surface of your plant. And the fertilizer is good for about 180 days before you need to refresh your slow release fertilizer. That's one aspect of fertilizing. That's option number one. So another way of fertilizing your orchid is using this powdered mix here, which you mix with water. But this is great because every time you water, you can actually make a stock solution of this. For this one, for example here, it recommends 1 teaspoon for every gallon of water. But what I like to usually recommend to people is that you want to fertilize weekly, but weekly. So what that means is that in strength-wise, you want to fertilize at half strength. So if this is recommending 1 teaspoon for every gallon, you want to cut that in half. So that's the weekly aspect in strength, but also in the fact that the other aspect of weekly is you want to do it on a weekly basis. So for this, we have 1 gallon of water already poured into this container. And what I'm going to do is, even though the instructions tells me to put 1 teaspoon, I'm going to only do half a teaspoon. So I have half a teaspoon measuring utensil here. And then from there, you can see that we have half a teaspoon of fertilizer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sprinkle this into the water here. So it's not a whole lot. You don't need a whole lot. This is going to last you quite a bit of time. And from there, I'm going to use a small ladle and I'm just going to mix it. You want to make sure that you have all of this fertilizer dissolve. So you can see that all the powder in this water solution here is totally dissolved and has become my fertilizer solution here, in which I'm going to scoop a little bit of fertilizer and I'm going to just pour it over the plant here. So you want to do a few ladles each time here. You want to make sure that enough fertilizer goes through the entire pot where it actually exits the bottom of the pot. So for a plant this size, I probably would do maybe 5 or 6 ladles of fertilizer to ensure that the entire pot receives all of that fertilizer. And just like watering, you don't want to get the water into the crown of the plant. And because of this, if you have water stuck in the crown, it usually causes rot, especially when it comes to cold temperatures. So now we're going to talk about how to get your orchid to rebloom. So take a look at this orchid. It's without any flowers, but people think that after flowers have dropped, they think that the orchid is dead, but that's actually not the case. We want to wait till this entire inflorescence or flower spike to actually brown first before cutting it off. So this is kind of the different stages of what you might expect of a dying inflorescence or dying flower spike. So it's completely green. Don't cut this off yet. But take a look at this. You'll see that the bottom half of the inflorescence is actually still green, and the top of this flower spike is actually brown. So you don't want to cut this quite yet until you see a small new inflorescence come out from the old inflorescence. You can see this really tiny bud coming out of this area here. And I typically tell people, wait till it gets brown first, then cut it, because you have a chance of a new inflorescence coming out from the old spike. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the inflorescence right at that base here. So I'm going to bring out my tools once again. As I mentioned before, we like to use clean, sterilized clippers because we want to make sure that we're not spreading diseases from one plant to the next. So use your propane torch, use your bleach if you want to use that as your other source of disinfecting tools. Sterilize your tools here. And you want to do about 7 seconds on each side. So you sterilize your tools and you want to make the cut right about here. So right above the node, you see right there, that node there. And a node is an area in which you may get a new inflorescence coming out. You want to cut right above that. So I'm going to cut right above where that new inflorescence is coming from and remove this plant, this inflorescence from the very top. And then from there, in about a few weeks, you're going to get a whole new spike coming from this old spike. So don't cut your spike quite yet until it's turned fully brown. But not always will it produce another inflorescence from the same inflorescence. Sometimes it may completely brown, just like this, for example, here. This one has turned brown from the very tip to the very bottom. And from there, you want to cut this at the very, very base. But once again, remember that you want to sterilize your tools in between plants. So I'm going to sterilize this pair of clippers once again. So I've sterilized my tools here, and because this inflorescence has turned completely brown, I'm going to cut it at the very base. You want to get as close to the base as possible without interfering with the plant growth or the roots. So I'm going to make that incision right over here. I'm going to cut that. And there you go, it comes right off. And from there, I'm going to remove the inflorescence and the bamboo spike as well, since we don't need that for support any longer. So that's really what you want to do, is you want to analyze your inflorescence or the flower spike in itself and see if it's totally brown. When it's totally brown, then you cut it off at the base, because once again, if it's still green, you have the chance of a new inflorescence coming out of the old inflorescence. From the amount of sunlight that you give to your orchid, to the trimmings that you do for your inflorescences, to repotting, to fertilizing, to watering, these are all different factors that are going to help contribute to a happy orchid at the end of the day.